Started as a researcher. For a while, I led one of the research programs here that Jesse Nippert now leads, the LTER program. And in the last few years, I've stepped into the role of station director. I help to coordinate the activities out here at the biological station, and that covers the research activities and the various researchers from institutions all over the country and from other locations around the world that come here, but also overseeing the education and public outreach programs. It involves working with the education coordinator here at Kanza, as well as the Nature Conservancy and our other partners that have invested in research infrastructure at the site. That includes groups like the EPA, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I oversee the staff here, which is one of the reasons that Kanza has been so successful, is that we just have a fabulous staff that works well with the researchers and public, everybody out here.
The Kanza Prairie is fortunate to host a long-term ecological research site. The acronym is LTER. This is funded by the National Science Foundation, which is the marquee program in the United States that funds basic and applied scientific research. This is a program that began in the early 1980s, and the goal of this program was to start collecting long-term observational data in different ecosystem types across the United States, realizing that a lot of times patterns of change in natural ecosystems take a long time to develop. And Kanza is one of the first cohort of 6 sites, and now there's nearly 30 sites across the United States. So we're one of both the oldest running and most successful LTER sites in the United States. The LTER program has core data sets that we collect, and those core data sets focus on populations, includes monitoring changes in plant populations, as well as insect communities, avian communities, small mammals, and our bison herd. We also keep a long-term climate record. So we have daily measurements of temperature and precipitation and wind speed and the humidity, as well as other atmospheric characteristics are being measured. And then we have many projects that focus on disturbance. But by measuring these long-term plots on the landscape the same way year after year after year provides some inference, not only into how the system works, but overlaid in terms of understanding tallgrass prairie, we're fortunate to be able to actually be measuring changes in our climate and how climate change is impacting the tallgrass prairie. One of the things that is pretty amazing about the Kanza Prairie is the research that we do here really does guide and direct and impact a lot of the grassland research that's happening not only in Kansas and not only in the United States, but worldwide. Like, the Kanza Prairie really is the marquee grassland research site in the United States. And when I travel abroad in different places, I spend a lot of time in South Africa working over there, and they've all heard of and read the publications that come from our little prairie just outside of Manhattan, Kansas. It really does have a global impact, the research that we're doing here. So we can take some pride in the fact that we are doing research that is improving our ability to manage grasslands locally, but we should also take some pride in the fact that we're doing research that is being used in textbooks for understanding how this ecosystem works historically and how it's potentially going to work in an altered future climate.
One of the things that I think is truly remarkable about Kanza Prairie is that I've gone back and looked at some of the early papers that Lloyd Halbert wrote in collaboration with other faculty members literally around the time I was born in the late 1950s. And his vision for what Kanza would be as a field station and a site where scientists could study the prairie and the general public could learn to appreciate the prairie and all the ecosystem services and goods it provides. I think that vision has slowly played out over 50 years in ways that probably Lloyd wouldn't have even imagined, I think, at that time. And it's amazing to see that as far as the research enterprise, that the scientists that have come here have gone on to their own successful careers elsewhere, but they've trained students who come back here. And we have, I think, 3 or 4 generations, academic generations of scientists now that are conducting research at Kanza that are building on the things that were originally laid out in Lloyd's vision. So I think that's just an absolutely amazing testament to his view of why a tallgrass prairie research site like Kanza Prairie would be so important for the future.
One of the things as a requirement for being in the LTER program is all of that data that we collect has to be freely and publicly accessible. So we have a very sophisticated and completely available to anyone information management program. So as this data gets collected and processed and recorded, it's all put online and made available. And that's one of the main benefits to the broader scientific research community, is this is freely publicly accessible data. And not meaning like we get to use it first and when we're done other people get to use it. It's put online immediately so that everyone gets to benefit. One thing locally that is very nice about this is a lot of this data gets collected and processed by K-State undergraduates. And so these undergraduate students, like me when I was an undergraduate here at K-State, have an opportunity to be involved in data collection that's part of something big that's been going on now for decades and that is impacting science on a much larger scale. And so getting to collect that data, process that data, and be involved in all of the steps really shows students how science is done.
So I think one of the biggest changes in the time that I've been here is when I started, the research was largely driven by faculty members and students here at K-State. And we had a few people from outside that came to do research, but it was largely a local enterprise. It's grown so that I think more than half of our researchers and the student groups that come here come from places other than Kansas State University. So there's been, I think, an increasing recognition that if you want to do grassland ecology, that this is the place to come. And we've attracted people from literally all over the world here to come and participate in the things that we do. I guess one of the biggest challenges is balancing the three missions of the biological station, which is balancing the research activities that go on here, the need for conserving the prairie, and including the land that makes up Kanza Prairie, and our education and outreach activities. The research definitely feeds into the education. We can use our education and outreach program to inform the public as they use the nature trails about why they should appreciate the prairie. There are some challenges, like, for example, some research activities that aren't consistent with just conserving the prairie that might involve actually damaging part of the prairie. So if we set up some experiments where we put out large rain-out shelters, that's going to leave a mark in terms of the impact that has on the land. But the hope is that the things that we learn from those experiments ultimately feed back into understanding better how to preserve the prairie in a changing world.
KEEP is the Kanza Environmental Education Program, and so the focus of the program is to bring kids, kindergarten through 12th grade, out to their ecosystem to show them the glory and the beauty of the tallgrass prairie, and so they can see it the way it needs to be seen and understood and appreciated. KEEP began in 1996 when a group of researchers decided that there needed to be a formal program here at Kanza for education. And so the first director of KEEP was Dr. Valerie Wright, who happened to be a docent with Kanza, so the docent program began before KEEP did. And so Dr. Wright was a docent and an educator and a researcher, and she started the program.
It really started with Phoebe Samuelson, who had retired from K-State and was looking for a place to have education about the prairie. And she was really instrumental in getting everything started. She actually cornered some people at Division of Biology and was very persistent about the fact that we needed to have a program where we were educating kids and the public, not just children. And we wanted a liaison group, which was the docent program. The docents were key to getting information out to the communities. We never had any trouble finding people, but we had a core of people who were just fantastic. They brought so much from their own experience, from their own ways of helping us and helping the Friends of Kanza Prairie, as a matter of fact, that through the years we've had people who have stayed with us the entire time. There are some people from our community that gave a big part of their lives to Kanza Prairie, being docents. One person, Wilton Thomas, who was a docent here for years and became one of the most important people for taking people out on the Bison Loop. That was his favorite thing to do, was get into a bus full of people, and he did that until about 2 months before he died. So I get choked up about that. This is a constant process. We have to keep doing this. Adult education has to do with the disappearing tallgrass prairie.
A parent, Ellen Kellerman, and a colleague, Karen Smith, we all decided to go walking the Kanza. We thought we needed to know, learn more and walk the Kanza. And when I called the biological station person, it was Valerie Wright, and she said, "Sure, let me come down and meet you when you three come to the Kanza, and I have some information for you." I learned so much flora and fauna. We met teachers from all over Kansas. It's probably one of the most important experiences I've had in education, and you need more experiences like this. I think just seeing the prairie, I think you need, as a teacher, you need to be uplifted, you need to be energized. It's a real world experience, and you take that enthusiasm and passion back to your classroom. You're excited, your kids are excited, and that really does make a difference.
Just this last summer, we had a group of kids that were girls understanding the science of Manhattan. And we had a young lady, I think she was in 3rd grade, was asking questions about why doesn't fire kill the prairie? And I was telling her how most of the body of the prairie is underground. And she said, I get it. So if the prairie was like a person, it's like their body is buried underground, but only their hair is sticking out above the soil. And I said, that's exactly it. Perfect metaphor for the prairie from one of our kids.
As a kid, I spent a lot of time playing in old fields and wooded habitats back in Ohio. And I was always fascinated with nature, just the diversity of plants and animals around me, especially with insects. My PhD is actually in entomology. Growing up just looking at this fascinating, diverse world, I was curious about how it works, and I still am.
My involvement in Prairies Across Kansas was that each teacher was supposed to bring a volunteer with them. And I was an English teacher, but friends with Jan because we both enjoyed the out of doors. The chance to live on the prairie in that 3-story bunkhouse where one of the last gunfights in Kansas was fought, that was exciting for me. My whole concept is language. The 2 areas of English that I probably put the most emphasis on was writing and critical thinking. That connected to me to the Prairie program also because the scientist works in a very similar way.
And one day I heard that there was a class being taught at Kanza Prairie, and I had always wanted to learn more. And Valerie's guidance, I learned this whole new world. And it was absolutely incredible, and I just wanted to learn more. I was motivated or inspired to keep learning more because then I could share it with students. And I asked the superintendent, what do you want me to do with this program? And his first words were, make science fun. I thought, no problem. And then he said, teach them what scientists do. Through doing that, I was able to involve ecology, entomology, botany, lab sciences to a great extent. And now I teach a religious ed class once a week, and we still end up talking about plants and creation and science of it all. And so it's really exciting. I just love doing it.
The Wildflower Walk that we have at the first week of June is one of the best places for people to be introduced to the tallgrass prairie, because it is when the prairie is at its fanciest and its showiest, because the wildflowers, the spring wildflowers, are at their peak. And so having the opportunity to come out to Kanza Prairie and to walk a trail that's not open to the public is an amazingly wonderful option. The Friends of Kanza Prairie is a great organization to allow people to do that. Prairies are my passion. I grew up in the prairie. I have lived in the prairies all my life. I have worked my entire adult life to better understand and know the prairie ecosystem, and it continually amazes me with its subtleties and its complexity and its dynamic nature. I will forever be surprised by things that happen on the prairie, and so it's my goal to share that with others, regardless of how old they are or where they come from. I want to share the beauty and the complexity of the prairie with others. There's very few places that you can do that and do that easily, and so they can come and see the subtleties and the complexity and the changes even from day to day. And at the end of all of this, what we hope is that they see it, they appreciate it, they understand it, and they might fall in love with it. Bison are great. Bison are pretty cool. So bison are your charismatic, large mammal of the ecosystem that everybody loves. Who doesn't love bison, and who doesn't love, bison calves? And so Kanza Prairie does have a bison herd that we use for research purposes, but they're also something that we use for education purposes. And so we will take groups of kids out to show them the bison. And what a wonderful selling tool of the prairie to see actual, active, functioning bison of all ages and sizes just within a stone's throw of the city of Manhattan.
One of the things that I enjoy the most about the research community here at Kanza Prairie is that the group that comes back that's been doing long-term research is a very tight-knit community. It's not a very competitive group, it's a very cooperative group, and I don't think you find that at many other field stations. So I feel like through my time here as a researcher, as a former lead investigator in the LTR program, and now as the director of Kanza Prairie, I've been able to facilitate some of that. And I think that's an important legacy I'd like to leave behind. It's hard to predict where we'll be in 50 years because I think 50 years ago, it would have been really hard to predict where we are now. I don't think anybody quite envisioned yet the LTER program being this multi-decade research program, that there would be a National Ecological Observatory Network, which is now functioning at Kanza Prairie. So where will we be in 50 years? I think that the long-term experiments that we've started now, some of them I hope are continuing. I would like to see these go for a century because one of the important lessons is that the longer you study the prairie here, the longer you look at its response to a changing environment, the more you will learn, and there'll be surprises, ecological surprises. There'll be tipping points. There'll be things that you didn't expect to see based on the first 10 or 20 years of that study. So I'd love to see some of these current experiments continuing in the future. And I think that as the Earth's human population continues to grow, as global changes and other environmental pressures increase, that sites like Kanza Prairie generating information on how ecosystems respond to these changes and how best we can manage those systems to conserve them in a way that the future generations can enjoy them will be more and more important. I kind of see that's our role here as a biological station. My favorite part about coming out to Kanza Prairie is getting away from the office and my computer and having the opportunity to reconnect with the reasons why I wanted to become a biologist and ecologist in the first place.
It's part of my spirituality too. I feel most connected to the world at large when I'm out of doors. I'm most connected to guidance when I look at the way nature works. It helps me to live my life in a more proactive and focused sort of way.
I just love the grasses. I love big blue stem, little blue stem. I love side oats. I don't mow my lawn sometimes because I have a little patch of one of them here or there. It's really, everything else depends on the grass pretty much.
Oh, I like the grass. Yeah. There's way too many forbs and things in here, these flowering plants, and this grass isn't even on Kanza. And so my favorite thing about Kanza is big blue stem and Indian grass and the dominant warm season grasses, because they're just monsters. They just sit out there and take abuse from climate and bison, and we walk on them and they can just be droughted to, you know, beyond belief, and they just keep cranking. Like, my favorite thing about Kanza is the dominant warm season grasses. So, yeah.
The favorite part of being a docent is taking out a group. My favorite age group is 4th grade. I just love that age. They're so ready to learn and so ready to be outdoors. Once a docent, always a docent.
I hope that they see the magic of the prairie, that they slow down and take a look and see how amazingly complex the prairie is, surprisingly complex that the prairie is. What I hope they're doing is coming back to see the changes and the complexity.
It's an awesome place to work. I love being out here. I love the people that I work with out here. Actually, I can't think of a better place that I would have wanted to spend the major part of my career.